Today's daf is daf Nun Aleph. And we're in the middle of a sugya here on daf Nun Aleph. We started before Chag. And we're up to Esfei Abaye, which is approximately 7 lines down from the top. This is a kasha of Abaye on Rava. And he's going to try to prove that Rava's explanation of Rabbi Gamliel with the Mimon Shach is not accurate. Why? Because we have a brisa. The brisa records that Umode Rabban Gamliel sheyesh get liachar maimar. What's the case of yesh get liachar maimar? He gave a get, obviously after a maimar, but we're talking about one of the yevamos. And there are 2 yevamos, there are 2 tsaros. And he gave a get to one of the 2 yevamos after a maimar bitzarasa, meaning if there's Rachel and Leah, so let's say he did maimar with Rachel, then he gave a get to Leah, and Rabbi Gamliel is going to be mod in this case, and umaimar achar get. And so too, if he, let's say, gave a get to Rachel first, and then maimar to Leah. Okay, so those are those 2 cases of get liachar maimar, maimar lachar get. And then this is the real punchline. Get achar bia umaimar. What does that mean? Get achar bia umaimar. Obviously, there are 3 maisim that are being done over here. And let's say there are 3 different yevamos. That means the late Reuven was married to 3 different wives. They all fall for yibum. And we're talking about get achar bia umaimar. Okay, what happens now? There was a get that was given liachar bia. That means he had bia with one of these 2, but one of the 3, 3 yevamos. And then he gave him a get to a second of the 3 yevamos. So we have now the following sequence. We have maimar, then we have bia, and then we have get, meaning 3 yevamos. The first one he gave maimar, second one he bia, and third one was get. So that's called nitan get liachar shebal tzarasa. V'lifnei habia nasan maimar l'tzara acheres. And even though bia is kona biyavoma, but the bia was done after a maimar that was implemented to the other tzara, and that bia becomes a bia psula, because the maimar to the first tzara excludes yibum to the second tzara. And therefore the bia to the second tzara is not mafkia the zikas yibum as it normally would. And therefore, if after the bia he gives a get to the third tzara, that get is meaningful, it's effective, generated an iser of the krovos of this miskareshes on the yavam. Now we have another scenario. The maimar liachar bia the get. So he starts with giving a get to one of the yevamos, bia to the second, and maimar to the third. And we're going to say the same thing here, that once he gave a get to the first of the 3 yevamos, he is excluded from yibum. He needs to give chalitza. And therefore the bia to the second of these three yevamos is not a bias kinyan gomor. It cannot be mafkia the zika. It's already a bia psula. And since it cannot remove the zika, therefore the mimer that follows is going to be meaningful. It's going to be effective. We see from this brisa that even Rav Gamliel concedes that if there's bia after maimar, that bia is considered a bia psula. And as a result of the fact that the bia is defined and classified as a bia psula, therefore get lachrea is going to be meaningful. It's going to be effective to generate an Easter of krovas grushasel and also to passel her for kahuna. And the same thing applies in bia lacher get. So the Gemara Abaye now analyzes his kasha, subjecting to Rava. The Rav Gamliel, if Rav Gamliel was vacillating about the status of maimar, whether it's considered a kinyan to be kona the yevama, or for example, whether get in the opposite way is effective to be mafkia the zika, then Rav Gamliel should not have taken the position that bia liachar get umaymar, meaning either or, is considered a bia psula, which means that the maisa after the bia is going to be effective. Because mimonashach, according to both studim in the suffix of Rav Gamliel, the way Rav interpreted Rav Gamliel, the maisa that comes after bia should not have any tokef, should not have any chalos, should not be effective at all. Because according to one side, Maimer is kone. So she was already knuya legamre with the Maimer that was done with the first of the three tsaros, first of the three yevamos. And that means the Maimer is viewed as if he had implemented a full-fledged yibum. And therefore the bia to the shnia is a bias nus. It's not a bias kinyan at all. She's already knu. The other Torah who received the maimer was already knuyala. So therefore the get that's given after the bia, it's like a get that's given to a strange woman that you were never married to. Cannot generate any sort of rovas grushasa. Because once the zika is gone, then the get is meaningless. Well, let's go back now to, again, within the framework of Rava's interpretation of Gamliel, the status or the definition of get. The suffix was where the get completely undermines the zika. That's called docha. And if that be the case, then the bia following the get is just a bias nus. And therefore the mimer that comes after the bia could not be konen. And she should not need a get. And the same thing is true according to that side that mimer is not konen at all, or get is not mafki at all, as far as zika sibum is concerned. Then lo nifkemu hayevamos milis yabem acher mimer vaget shenasu b'tchila. Is therefore, by he says to heavy, that bia that came after either the get or the mimer can bia l'tilachatchila, since the mimer and the get are not chal at all in this yevama, then it cannot be gorea, cannot in any way impinge upon the kinyan of bia afterwards for tiknik. And then the bia should be again a complete bia with the second of the three yevamos. There'll be kona her, and the get that's given afterwards, the shlishis, that's like a get that's given to a zara, to someone who's not shayat, not married to me. and would not generate any Isra on the Krovos. Also, the Maimer Lachre would not be Kona, and she shouldn't need a get. And if you ask me to prove that Bia Betila is Ein Maimer V'Get Achrea, that's not, we learned in that Mishnah, Be'ila, Bisman Shi Betchila, Ein Lachrea Klu. Once the Bia began the whole process over here, then she's already Knuyalo, and there's no meaning to neither a Kenyan Maimer nor Afkas get. Well, the Miman of Shach approach to Rav Gamliel as if to say Rav Gamliel is mistapek, whether or not the Maimer is Mafkia, the Zika, or it's not, whether get is, I should say, Maimer, it generates an upgrade on the Zika as a Kenyan, and whether or not get is Mafkia, the Zika, all that doesn't work out with this price about Bia that's sandwiched in between get and Maimer in any sequence. Rav Gamliel accepted the opinion of the Chacham that the get, if the get is given to Yavam, the Dachi, it's Mafkia, the Zika of the Yibum, Midrabanan. On a Dorais level, obviously you need Chalitza, but Midrabanan get is Mafkia, Zika Yibum. And therefore, certainly the Bia after that get is not Kona Legamer, because we agree to the Chachamim that the get itself is Mafkia the Zika. So if you've already removed the Zika, there's no way that the Bia could be Kona. And the same thing is in Maimar. V'chein Maimar, the Kani, it's a Kenyan Midrabanan. And therefore, the Bia afterwards, in the tzara of the Balas HaMaimer, is not, it cannot be Kona Legamer, because again, we're holding now that Maimar Kani, it generates a Kenyan. Again, only the Rabbanim, but it generates a Kenyan. Oh, Nihu. Now we analyze from Gamliel in Ein Get Lacher, Get Ein Maimar Lacher Maimar. The Rabbanim were not Chachamim. I mean, no, I don't mean Chachamim of Rabbi Gamliel, but I mean the Rabbanon did not make a takana that the get is mafkia zika like chalutza, like chalisa. Chalisa is on the top level; it's 100%. They never gave get the upgrade to 100%. And the same is true of Maimar as a replacement for Bia. So you have get as a replacement for Chalitza and Maimar for Yibum. The Maimar is not Kona, Kenyan Gomer like Yibum. Is Omer Rabbanon, what did the Rabbanon establish when they were masaking these two kinyonim? Ha Yevama Bechad Sad Mahani Bey Get. The Rabbanon were masaking two different kinyonim. In one Yevama, or you could say in each Yevama, Bechad Sad, on one part of the Zika relationship, Mahani Bey Get. They were masaking that a get would be meaningful to be mafkia that side of Yibum. Now, this is chad sad. Chad sad means a part of her. Again, it's hard to define whether it's qualitative or quantitative, but there's a part of her where the get is meaningful to be mafkia the zika, and it's chal. But the power of the get exhausts itself in that chelik, in that part of the yevamot, of all the yevamot. Ubechad sad. So they made another takana that in one side or one segment of the zika relation, mahani bar maimar, there's room for maimar to be operative, to be a kona to strengthen, so to speak, or upgrade that chelek of the zika. And this kinyan is effective only on that chelek of the yevamot, again, of each yevamot. So now we could say that zikas yivam divides up into two parts. In one part is a get, that's tofes. In another part, maimar is tofes. So we can summarize it by saying b'chelik echad tofes get, b'chelik hasheni tofes maimar. Therefore, get acher get lo dachi. Da dacha le kama. The first get already, how should I say, focused on that chelik of the zika, on which the Rabbana made a takana that the get will be chal to mafkia zika, and the first get was already mafkia that chelik of the zika. There's no room to be mafkia that chelik of zika through another get. He already is mafkia through the first get. Now, on the second half of the zika, the other half of the zika, which the first get was not mafkia, the second get is not going to have any impact on that as well. We have a mirror image in the case of maimar. Umaimar acha maimar lo kani, because again, we're giving him one chelik to be kona with maimar. To kani le kamen, the first maimar is already kona. There's no power to create another maimar. Well, kani le kama. So that part of the zika on which the kinyan maimar could be chal was already chal through the first maimar, the maimar rishon, and there's no more room left over for another maimar to be chal. On the second chilik of the zika, where the maimar lo kana, there's no koach in the maimar sheni to be kona, and therefore the maimar is not going to be effective. That's called a maimar achar maimar. However, in the case of get liachar maimar, or maimer leachar get, these two actions, these two maisim were done in two different chalok, in two different parts of the zika. And high milsa kadachi, v'high milsa kadachi. So it means that the get that's given to one yevama is docha, that chelik of the zika that was designated for through the takonis chacham for the get to be mafkia. And then the maimar, subsequent to the get, is kona on the second chelik of the zika, not the chelik of the get, but the other chelik of the zika. So each one of these maisim were done on two different parts, so to speak, segments of the zika. So we're not going to say in these cases of get lachar maimar that the first maisa took up the whole space and there was no room for the second maisa. Now, if I wants to explain the shita of the chachamim, for Rabbanan, they hold yesh get yesh maimar lachar maimar. They hold kol chad v'chad on behalf of each yavam takinu le Rabbanan. The Rabbanan made a takana for each yavam that he has the right to give a get to be mafkia his particular chelik in the zika, or maimar bechol yavama. There was takana giving each yavama, if there are many yavamas, a right for a maimar to strengthen or upgrade her chelik in the zika to a maimar. And just like maimar is not kona the entire zika of yibum, it's only kona a chelik of the zika yibum. So too, maimar is not kona. It's only kona the chelik, that part that the yavam has in this yavama, where he made a maimar. And again, just like get is any mafkia, it's only mafkia that chelik mizika sayibum on which they made a takana that get would be effective as hafka. So too, he cannot be mafkia anything beyond that chelik of the nosein get, or biyavama shekibla as a get. So if the yavam does a maimar and a yavama, he cannot do a second maimar. He already was kona her, whatever they gave him the power to be kona. But he didn't impact on the kinyan beyond that chelik of the zika that he has in the yavama. And therefore, when his yavam, his brother, wants to give a get, if the first yavam gave a get, or he wants to do a maimar after the first one did a maimar, we're not going to take away his koach to impact on the zika by virtue of the fact that his brother did that action. So if, let's say, the yavam did a maimar in one yavama, he can now do a maimar vis-a-vis the other yavama, the other tsar, because his kinyan was only poel, was only effective on a chelik haroy maimar, and it doesn't impact on the other yavamos. So you do one maimar on one yavama, and then another maimar on another yavama. That's according to the Shittas Chachamim. And now the Gemara wants to clarify Rabbi Gamliel's statement in the Brisa that there's a maimar after bia psula. Right, there was a get, then a bia, and then a maimar. Or there was a maimar, and then a bia, and then a get. Hi, bia psula. that bia is defined as a bia psula because it was done after a get that was given to another yevama, or a kinyan mimer that was given to another yevama. And therefore the bia cannot be kona ligamre in a way that a subsequent get or mimer cannot be chal. And there are really two tzadim here. On the one hand, adifa mimaymar, the bia is more powerful than the maymar. On the other hand, griya mimaymar, it's less effective, less powerful than the maymar. Now the Gemara explains. On the one hand, bia is adifa mimaymar, bilu maymar, achar maymar, lo mahani. Bilu bia, achar maymar, mahani. But as we said, according to Rabbi Gamliel, there's only that much space that's designated for a mimer, and once that's taken up by the first mimer, there's no space for the second mimer. But bia is a different kind of a kinyan. It's not in any way a repeat performance of mimer, and therefore bia liachar mimer is mahani. It's effective, which means it's going to generate a need for a get for that bia. It's going to also aser the krovosel. So even though the bia is kona the yevama for yavam, and it should be poel on that very same chelik that the mimer was poel, so the bia is considered a kinyan choshev yoser. In other words, whereas another mimer would not be kona after the mimer, but bia would be kona. And even though there already was a kinyan on that chelek through maimar, such that another maimar would not be meaningful, but nevertheless bia would be meaningful, and that's called bia adifa. On the other hand, griya maimar, the kinyan of bia in this context is even less effective than maimar. Dilu maimar achar get, koni lekuli shira de get. If a mimer came subsequent to a get, so the get was given to this yevama or to a tzara, now, if he does mimer, he's going to be kona that which the get left over, so to speak, that part of the zika that the get was not effective to remove, to undermine. On that, he can place a mimer. But bia, if the bia came after the get instead of a mimer after the get, lo kanyule lekula shira the get. It's not kona that which was left over in the zika after the get, the shirayim of the zika saget, and the kinyan is not chal on all those parts where a kinyan yibum should be chal, because the mimer that was done after the bia is going to be kona, and it's going to generate an isa on the krovim, it's going to be mechayv get, and the bia that's made afterwards, the yevama nosefes kona less osa achiting lo get the asa b'krovos sen. So this leads us to Tan Rabban. And Tan Rabban will pick up in Mir Hashem later on today.